So dear students, today we are continuing with that circulation and gas exchange chapter. We are talking about gas exchange now. So gas exchange supplies basically oxygen for cellular respiration, and it also has to dispose of the carbon dioxide. So that is precisely for the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Now gases diffuse down pressure gradients in the lungs and other organs as a result of difference in partial pressure. So it means that there will be a partial pressure in the medium, that is blood or maybe hemolymph, and there is a partial pressure of gases in the tissues, and against those concentration gradients things will move from there one area to another area against the concentration gradient. The partial pressure is the pressure exerted by a particular gas in a mixture of gases. Now a gas diffuses from a region of higher partial pressure to the region of lower partial pressure. Simply in the lungs and tissues, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuses from where their partial pressures are higher to where these are lower. So this is a very normal process. Then what's required? Respiratory medium is required. For this exchange to take place, animals can use air or water as a source of oxygen or a respiratory medium like blood. Now in a given volume, there is less oxygen available in water than in air. So in air, basically there is more amount of oxygen is there. In water, of course, there is less. So systems are actually different from each other for air and water. If animal is living in air, it will have a different kind of system. If it is in water, it will have a different system. Obtaining oxygen from water requires greater efficiency than air breathing indeed. Now second thing which is required is the respiratory surface, where the exchange should take place with the medium and the tissues. So animals require large moist respiratory surfaces for exchange of gases. Now this is very important, that there should be large surface area for maximum exchange to take place, and secondly that should be moist to facilitate that exchange. Now between the cells and the respiratory medium, which could be air or water, gases have to be exchanged. So the surface where they should exchange should be large, and it should also be moist. Gas exchange across respiratory surfaces takes place by diffusion, that is from higher to lower concentration. Respiratory surfaces, they vary by animal and can include outer surfaces like skin. For example, amphibia also exchange gases by skin. Gills in water like fishes, trachea in insects which are having air directly, and then lungs which will exchange between air and tissues through blood. In trachea, it's directly between air and the as we have described earlier, air and the tissues or the cells. So what is required for exchange of gases? The medium, the surface through which exchange will take place, and of course on the other side there will be tissues or the cells. For example, we'll take a few examples, of course. Gills, these are basically outfoldings of the body that create a large surface area for gas exchange. Now what happened? These are outfolds. Here you can see in the diagram that this is the blood vessel in the gill arch, from which outfolds are created, which we call them gill filaments basically. And here water moves. And what happens that this is oxygen poor blood which is coming here from the heart, and when it passes through the lungs and make a network here you can see, and blood oxygenate and then comes to become oxygen rich and then goes towards the body. Now the movement of water is actually in the other direction of the blood flow. So blood flow is in this direction and water flow is in this direction. Result of this is actually more efficient exchange of gases. So here you can see that how exchange of gases takes place. When it is moving here, oxygen saturation is oxygen level is actually concentration is increased. This is one example. Then there is a term used, ventilation. Ventilation basically moves the respiratory medium over the respiratory surface. What's the process of ventilation? Means the respiratory medium moves over the respiratory surface and exchange takes place. Now aquatic animals move through water or move water over their gills for ventilation. Fish gills use a counter current exchange system where blood flows in the opposite direction of the water passing over the gills, and blood is always less saturated with oxygen definitely than the water it meets. It maximizes the diffusion. Now, tracheal system is in insects is a very efficient system because air is much lighter medium in comparison to water. Tracheal system insect consists of tiny branching tubes that penetrate the body. These are penetrating the body, and the tracheal tubes supply oxygen directly to the body cells. I mean, from air directly to the body cells. Now, respiratory and circulatory systems are separate in this case. So larger insects must ventilate their tracheal system to meet their oxygen demand. Here you can see in a diagram of a grasshopper that here are the spiracles, which are openings outside the body from which air enters, and then there are air sacs and there are air tubes. Air tubes are called tracheae. Now these tracheae are connected to the external openings called spiracles, and these air sacs are storing the air, and then there is a system of tubes. This system is connected to the whole of the body tissues and the cells. So when this gas so what happened that these tubes are close to the or connected to the body tissues, and gas exchange takes place directly from air to the tissues. Now the lungs. The third modification is lungs. These are infoldings of the body surface. The gills are outfolding, trachea are air tubes, and lungs are the more folding. So the circulatory system, which is open or closed, transport gases between the lungs and the rest of the body. So size and complexity of lungs correlate with an animal's metabolic rate. How fast is the metabolic, how slow it is. According to that, lungs will be developed. A system of branching ducts, air tubes, they conveys air to the lungs. Air inhaled through the nostrils goes to the pharynx, to larynx, to trachea, to bronchi, to bronchioles, and to the alveoli, which is site of gas exchange. So alveoli are very important because these are sites of gas exchange. Now, exhaled air passes over the vocal cords to create sounds. Alveoli are wrapped by capillaries for gas exchange. Now, this is important that how gas exchange will take place. Let's look at the diagram ahead. So what happened that here is a branch of pulmonary vein which is coming down. We know that in pulmonary vein there will be oxygen-rich blood because it's going back, and pulmonary artery which is having blue blood. So blood is coming here from heart and actually making a network of capillaries around the alveoli, a bunch of alveoli, and then they are going back in the form of vein towards the heart. So bringing that the oxygen-rich blood. So what happened that these alveoli are actually at each inhalation are filled with air. When these are filled with air, these capillaries are very connected to them. Okay, so what happened that this blood which is coming from the heart, coming from the body, is not having much oxygen, circulates around these alveoli. Now alveoli have a single layer of cells. These capillaries also do have the same. So exchange of gases takes place by diffusion, and then this blood which is having now oxygen, a lot of oxygen, is going back towards the heart. So this is how this system is very efficient in exchange of gases. Now more modification. What happened in birds? How a bird basically takes in that level of exchange, do that exchange of gases. Birds have 8 or 9 air sacs that function as bellows that keep air flowing through the lungs. Because birds have to fly, and that's why they have a very high kind of metabolic rate. Now they do it by more efficient system of air sacs. Here you can see air sacs in the body of a bird. So air passes through lungs in one direction only. Every exhalation completely renews the air in the lungs. So air enters inside and fills in the air sacs, and then air sacs they fill in the lungs, and when they exhale, the air in the lungs is completely exchanged, goes out, and then next inhalation takes place. So these air sacs actually help them in actually getting more air for the lungs inside. Now more adaptations for gas exchange includes pigments that bind and transport gases, like hemoglobin is one most common thing that we know, example of it. The metabolic demands of many organisms require that the blood transport large quantities of oxygen and carbon dioxide, because if metabolism is high, more oxygen will be required, more carbon dioxide will be produced. So more metabolic demands, more respiration will be required. Blood arriving in the lungs has a low partial pressure of oxygen and a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide relative to the air in the alveoli. And in the alveoli, oxygen diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses into the air. And then the exhalation takes place and the cycle continues. In tissue capillaries, the partial pressure gradient, as we have seen in the previous diagram of alveoli, moves the gases from in both directions. Now, respiratory pigments are the proteins that transport oxygen, greatly increases the amount of oxygen that blood can carry. Arthropods, for example, and many mollusks do have a pigment which is called hemocyanin. Hemocyanin actually have copper as their oxygen binding component. We know the hemoglobin, which is there in the larger vertebrates, and it is having basically iron. But arthropods and mollusks do have hemocyanin. Now, most vertebrates and some invertebrates use hemoglobin with iron, which is oxygen binding component contained within the erythrocyte, the red blood cells. So erythrocytes or the red blood cells do have hemoglobin, which is oxygen binding component. Of course, it increases the efficiency of oxygen carrying of in those blood cells, RBCs or erythrocytes. So hemoglobin, single hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. The hemoglobin dissociation curve shows that a small change in the partial pressure of oxygen can result in a large change in delivery of oxygen. The carbon dioxide produced during cellular respiration lowers blood pH and decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So if carbon dioxide is increased, affinity of hemoglobin for binding oxygen is actually increased. This is called the Bohr shift. Now, more adaptations in animals. Migratory and diving mammals have evolutionary adaptation that allow them to perform extraordinary kinds of respiratory modifications or adaptations. The extreme oxygen consumption of the antelope, like different types of organisms, underlies its ability to run at high speed over long distances, because antelopes have to escape the predators and they run fast. Oxygen consumption increases. They do have modifications. Deep diving, air breathe, stockpile oxygen and deplete it slowly. So those who have to deep dive, those animals actually breathe a lot of air and then slowly use it. Then the Weddell seals, the seals have a high blood to body volume ratio and can store oxygen in their muscles in myoglobin protein. So they have myoglobin which they store that oxygen then use it for the later time when they are actually diving. So there are many modifications, like deep diving is specific thing, and also seals have to stay for longer times inside that the body, inside the water, and that's why they have these modifications. Now, those organisms which are living in very cold and very hot areas, they also have different types of modifications. Like antelopes also have to protect their brain from that hot effect of the heat inside the which is coming from outside, and the blood become more warmer. So they do have a nasal passage from which blood has to pass, and then it reaches the brain. So when it is passing through nasal passage from the volume of air, it actually cools down. So air cooled down the blood before going to the and transported towards the brain. So it cools down, and brain does not get hotter or warmer blood. There could be more modifications in terms of the vessels. That is, vessels become, we can say, dilated or maybe uh, modified in a way to increase blood flow towards the skin, or sometimes they also have to modify the flow of blood and increase or decrease it. When it decreases it by constriction of vessels, then blood towards the extremities and other parts is actually decreased. So this is also, those are also associated with the with, we can say, dealing with hot or cold environments. Well, for example, some organisms do have, we can say, like diving or others, which actually stores the oxygen inside the tissues or inside the just simply inside the respiratory system. So there are many modifications inside their stockpile oxygen, we can say. So this is about respiratory system gas exchange. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can post these always.